In the heart of Montana's rugged wilderness, where ancient traditions clash with modern hearts, a young woman's birthmark would either destroy her life or lead her to the greatest love story ever told. When the tribal council declared her body cursed and cast her into exile, she thought her story had ended. She was wrong. It was just beginning. What happens when a man willing to lose everything meets a woman who has already lost it all? Their forbidden love would challenge centuries of belief, ignite a community's fury, and prove that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from following tradition, but from daring to break it. This is the true story of Ayanna Crowfeather and Jack Morrison, a tale of exile, redemption, and a love so powerful it changed an entire community's understanding of what it means to be worthy of love. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Blackfeet Reservation as 22-year-old Ayanna Crowfeather stood before the tribal council, her heart pounding like war drums in her chest. The birthmark that covered half her face, a deep purple stain that resembled wings spread in flight, had been the source of whispers and pointing fingers since the day she was born. Today, those whispers would become her sentence. Elder Thomas Spotted Eagle, his weathered face carved with lines of authority and tradition, rose from his chair. The eagle feather in his gray hair caught the light filtering through the community center windows. Ayanna had known this man her entire life. He had bounced her on his knee as a child, taught her the old stories, and shown her how to braid sweetgrass. Now, his eyes held no warmth, only the cold weight of ancient beliefs. Ayanna Crowfeather, his voice carried across the room like thunder over the plains. The spirits have marked you. Your face bears the sign of the dark wind, the messenger of misfortune. Too many of our people have suffered since your birth. The drought that killed our cattle 3 summers ago. The fire that took the Henderson family's home last winter. Young Marcus Little Bear's accident at the rodeo just 2 weeks past. Ayanna's mother, Sarah, sat in the back row, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her father had left when Ayanna was 5, unable to bear the shame of having a marked daughter. Her grandmother, the only person who had ever called her beautiful, had died the previous spring, taking with her the last voice of acceptance in Ayanna's world. These are not coincidences, Elder Spotted Eagle continued. The old ways teach us that some marks are messages. Your mark speaks of storms to come, of spirits displeased. For the good of the tribe, for the protection of our people, you can no longer remain among us. Ayanna's best friend Maria, sitting 3 rows back, let out a soft sob. They had grown up together, sharing secrets and dreams under the vast Montana sky. Maria had been the only one who never stared at Ayanna's birthmark, who saw beyond the purple stain to the gentle soul beneath. But even Maria's father had forbidden their friendship when they turned 18, fearing his daughter would be tainted by association. I understand the old ways, Ayanna finally spoke, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her heart. But I have never brought harm to anyone. I work at the clinic, helping our people. I teach the children traditional beadwork. I honor the spirits and follow the path of my ancestors. Elder Joseph Many Horses, another council member, shook his head sadly. Child, it is not about what you do. It is about what you carry. The mark you bear has been seen before in our history. Always, it brings suffering to the people. We cannot wait for the next tragedy. The vote was swift and unanimous. Ayanna Crowfeather was banished from the reservation, forbidden to return under penalty of spiritual punishment that the council believed would rain down upon the entire tribe. She was given 3 days to gather her belongings and leave the only home she had ever known. That night, as Ayanna packed her few possessions into a battered suitcase, her mother sat on the edge of the narrow bed they had shared in their small trailer. The silence between them was filled with 22 years of love and 22 years of pain. Maybe it's for the best, Sarah whispered, though her words held no conviction. Maybe out there, in the white world, people won't see your mark the same way. Ayanna folded her grandmother's quilt, the one made from pieces of traditional dresses worn by 4 generations of Crowfeather women. Grandmother always said the mark was special, not cursed. She said it made me sacred, not shamed. Your grandmother lived in the old ways, before the missionaries came. She held on to beliefs that even our people have forgotten. Sarah's voice broke. But maybe she was right. On her final morning on the reservation, Ayanna walked to her grandmother's grave one last time. The headstone was simple, bearing only her name, Elena Crowfeather, beloved mother and grandmother. But, to Ayanna, she had been so much more. Elena had been her protector, her teacher, and her only source of unwavering love. "Grandmother," Ayanna whispered to the morning wind, "I don't know where to go. I don't know how to live in a world that sees me as cursed. Help me find my way." The wind picked up, rustling the sage and prairie grass around the grave. In that moment, Ayanna could almost hear her grandmother's voice, speaking words she had said many times before: "Child, sometimes we must leave everything familiar to find where we truly belong. The spirits have a plan, even when we cannot see it." Ayanna climbed into her old pickup truck, the same one she had learned to drive on the dirt roads of the reservation. As she pulled away from the only world she had ever known, she didn't look back. She couldn't. The sight of her homeland disappearing in the rearview mirror would have broken what little courage she had managed to gather. She drove south, toward the town of Haven Valley, a small ranching community 30 miles from the reservation border. She had been there before, accompanying her grandmother to sell beadwork at the farmer's market. The white townspeople had stared at her mark, but without the weight of centuries-old superstition behind their gaze. To them, she was simply different, not dangerous. Haven Valley sat in a valley between rolling hills, surrounded by cattle ranches that stretched toward the horizon. The town itself was small, maybe 3,000 people, with a main street that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. There was a diner, a hardware store, a small grocery market, and not much else. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep and outsiders were noticed immediately. Ayanna rented a small apartment above the town's only restaurant, a place called the Prairie Rose. The landlord, Mrs. Henderson, was a kind woman in her 60s who had moved to Montana from California 20 years earlier, seeking a simpler life after her husband's death. "I don't care about your birthmark, dear," Mrs. Henderson had said when Ayanna inquired about the apartment. "I care about whether you can pay rent on time and keep the place clean." The apartment was tiny but clean, with a small kitchen, a living area that doubled as a bedroom, and a bathroom with a window that looked out over the hills. It was more privacy than Ayanna had ever had, but the silence felt overwhelming after a lifetime of living surrounded by family and community. She found work at the town clinic, where her experience helping at the reservation's medical facility proved valuable. Dr. Patricia Wells, a woman in her 40s who had moved to Haven Valley to practice rural medicine, hired Ayanna as a medical assistant without hesitation. "Your qualifications speak for themselves," Dr. Wells had said during the interview. "And, frankly, we need someone with your experience working with diverse populations. Half our patients are from the reservation, and having someone who understands their culture will be invaluable." For the first few weeks, Ayanna moved through her new life like a ghost. She worked at the clinic, returned to her apartment, and spoke to no one unless necessary. The townspeople were polite but distant, curious about the native woman with the striking birthmark but unsure how to approach her. The only place she felt any sense of peace was at the town's small library, where she would spend her evenings reading. The librarian, an elderly woman named Ruth, had welcomed her warmly and never asked questions about her past or her mark. It was at the library that Ayanna first learned about the Morrison Ranch, the largest cattle operation in the valley. She had been reading local newspapers, trying to understand her new community, when she came across an article about Jack Morrison, the ranch owner who had recently taken over operations from his aging father. The article painted him as a progressive rancher who was implementing sustainable farming practices and working to bridge the gap between the white ranching community and the Native American reservation. He was 32 years old, unmarried, and, according to the article, spent most of his time working on his ranch and advocating for better relationships between communities. Ayanna found herself studying the photograph that accompanied the article. Jack Morrison had kind eyes and a gentle smile, the kind of face that suggested depth and thoughtfulness. But what struck her most was a quote near the end of the article: "I believe that understanding and respect between different cultures isn't just nice to have, it's essential for all of us to thrive. We're all part of the same land, and we need to start acting like it." 3 weeks into her new life in Haven Valley, Ayanna encountered Jack Morrison for the first time. She was walking home from work, taking the long way around the town square to delay returning to her empty apartment, when she heard shouting from the alley behind the hardware store.
"Get out of here, you mangy thing! Go back where you came from!"
Ayana hurried toward the sound and found a middle-aged man with a baseball bat threatening a thin, scared-looking dog that was clearly injured. The dog's leg was bleeding, and it was limping badly, but the man seemed intent on chasing it away rather than helping it.
"Hey!" Ayana called out. "Stop! Can't you see it's hurt?"
The man turned toward her, and she recognized him as Bob Turner, who worked at the gas station. His eyes widened when he saw her birthmark, and his expression shifted from annoyance to disgust.
"Great, another stray," he muttered. "Why don't you take your cursed face somewhere else too? We don't need your kind bringing bad luck to our town."
Before Ayana could respond, another voice cut through the tension.
"That's enough, Bob."
A tall man emerged from the shadow of the hardware store, and Ayana immediately recognized him from the newspaper photo. Jack Morrison was even more impressive in person, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of hard work, but it was his eyes that captured her attention. They were filled with genuine anger at Bob Turner's behavior and gentle concern when they shifted to her. "The dog is hurt and scared, just like anyone would be in that situation," Jack continued, his voice calm but firm. "And this woman was trying to help, which is more than I can say for you."
Bob Turner's face reddened. "Jack, you don't understand.
She's from the reservation, and she's got that mark."
Everyone knows what, Bob? That you're acting like an ignorant fool?"
Jack stepped closer to the injured dog, moving slowly so as not to frighten it further.
"Why don't you head home?"
"I'll take care of this." Bob grumbled something under his breath and walked away, but not before shooting another nasty look at Ayana. Jack knelt down beside the dog, speaking softly to it while examining its injured leg.
"Hey there, buddy. It's okay. We're going to help you." He looked up at Ayana. "I'm Jack Morrison. I don't think we've met." Ayana Crowfeather.
She knelt down beside him, and together they coaxed the frightened dog into Jack's truck.
"Dr. Wells is the best veterinarian for miles," Jack said as they drove toward the clinic.
"Lucky for this little guy that he wandered into town on your shift." Ayana glanced at him, surprised.
"How did you know I work at the clinic?"
Jack's cheeks reddened slightly.
"Small town. Word gets around."
Dr. Wells mentioned she hired someone with medical experience from the reservation.
Said you were the best assistant she'd ever had.
They rode in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the injured dog resting quietly between them. Ayana found herself stealing glances at Jack, trying to understand why he had stepped in to help both her and the dog when most people in town went out of their way to avoid her.
"Can I ask you something?" Jack said as they pulled into the clinic parking lot.
Ayana tensed, preparing for the question she'd heard countless times before about her birthmark, her tribe, or why she had left the reservation.
"Why did you want to help the dog? Most people would have just walked by."
The question surprised her. It was so simple, so human, and had nothing to do with the things that made her different. "Because he was hurt and scared, and no living thing should suffer if you can help it," she answered honestly. Jack smiled, and it was the first genuine smile anyone had given her since she'd arrived in Haven Valley.
"I was hoping you'd say something like that."
As they carried the injured dog into the clinic together, Ayana felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility that she might not have to face this new life entirely alone. It was just a small moment, a shared kindness toward a hurt animal, but it felt like the beginning of something important. She had no way of knowing that this chance encounter would change both their lives forever, or that the man walking beside her would soon risk everything he had ever known to prove that love could triumph over prejudice and fear. For now, it was enough that someone had seen her try to help and had chosen to help alongside her. In a world that had taught her to expect rejection and fear, Jack Morrison's simple act of kindness felt like a miracle. As they worked together to treat the dog's injuries, neither of them spoke much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the shared purpose of healing. And, for the first time since her exile from the reservation, Ayana allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could belong. The dog they rescued that evening became known around town as Lucky, and somehow he seemed to understand that his life had been saved by two people who were destined to save each other. Lucky made a full recovery and, having no owner to claim him, naturally gravitated between the clinic where Ayanna worked and the Morrison ranch where Jack had taken him for temporary shelter. In the weeks that followed their first meeting, Ayanna and Jack found themselves crossing paths more frequently than mere coincidence could explain. Jack began bringing his ranch hands to the clinic for their regular medical needs, claiming Dr. Wells provided better care than the larger hospital in the county seat. Ayanna would see him in the hardware store on Saturdays, picking up supplies while she ran her weekly errands. They would nod politely, exchange brief pleasantries about Lucky's progress, but both seemed to sense there was something more meaningful brewing beneath these casual encounters. The turning point came on a cold October morning when Ayanna arrived at work to find Dr. Wells in a state of controlled panic. A severe accident had occurred at one of the ranches. A worker had been trampled by a bull and needed immediate surgery that was beyond the small clinic's capabilities. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away, and the man was losing blood fast. "I need someone to assist me in stabilizing him for transport," Dr. Wells said, her hands already moving efficiently to prepare emergency supplies. "And I need someone who knows trauma care." Ayanna's training kicked in immediately. She had seen similar injuries on the reservation, where accidents were common and medical help was often hours away. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she helped Dr. Wells stop the bleeding and prepare the patient for transport. It was then that Jack Morrison burst through the clinic doors, his face pale with worry. The injured man was Miguel Santos, one of his most experienced ranch hands and a close friend. Miguel had been working for the Morrison family for 15 years, had taught Jack everything he knew about cattle, and was like an uncle to him. "How is he?" Jack demanded, his usual calm composure cracked with genuine fear. "He's stable for now, Dr. Wells replied, not looking up from her work. "But we need to get him to the hospital immediately. Every minute counts." "I'll drive," Jack said without hesitation. "My truck is faster than the ambulance, and I know every shortcut between here and the hospital." During that terrifying 40-minute ride, with Miguel's life hanging in the balance, Ayanna saw a side of Jack Morrison that revealed the true depth of his character. He drove with skill and determination, but his hands shook slightly on the steering wheel. He spoke constant words of encouragement to Miguel, who was drifting in and out of consciousness, telling him about his family in Mexico who was counting on him, about the new foal that had been born just that morning and would need Miguel's expert care. Ayanna worked steadily in the back of the truck, monitoring Miguel's vital signs and adjusting the Ford drip that was keeping him alive. More than once, she caught Jack's eyes in the rearview mirror, and she saw in them a gratitude so profound it made her breath catch. "You know what you're doing," Jack said quietly during one of Miguel's stable moments. "My grandmother taught me that healing is sacred work," Ayanna replied, her hands never stopping their careful ministrations. "She said the spirits give some people the gift of bringing life back from the edge of death. I don't know if that's true, but I know I can't stand by and watch someone suffer if I have the power to help." Miguel survived. The surgery was successful, and, after 3 days in intensive care, he was awake and asking when he could return to work. Jack spent every one of those 3 days at the hospital, and Ayanna found herself visiting as well, ostensibly to check on a patient but really because she had become invested in Miguel's recovery and concerned about Jack's obvious exhaustion. On the third evening, as Miguel was finally declared out of danger, Jack and Ayanna found themselves alone in the hospital cafeteria. Jack looked like he hadn't slept in days, which was probably true, and Ayanna impulsively bought him a cup of coffee and a sandwich. "You saved his life," Jack said simply, accepting the coffee gratefully. "We all did." "Dr. Wells, you, the hospital team, no," Jack interrupted gently. "I've seen a lot of medical professionals in action over the years. What you did in that truck, the way you stayed calm and knew exactly what to do. Miguel is alive because of your skill and your compassion." Ayanna felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. When was the last time someone had acknowledged her abilities, her worth, without any mention of her appearance or her supposed curse? "He's your friend," she said. "You would have done anything to save him." "Yes, but I couldn't have done what you did. And, more than that,
Jack paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Miguel is like family to me. He's been working our ranch since I was in high school. He taught me how to rope, how to read the weather, how to understand cattle. When I saw him lying there, hurt and bleeding, I thought I was going to lose someone I love. The fact that you fought so hard for someone you barely knew, someone who wasn't your responsibility, that says everything about who you are. They talked until nearly midnight that night, sharing stories about their lives, their work, their hopes for the future. Jack told her about taking over the ranch from his father, about his dreams of sustainable farming practices that would preserve the land for future generations. He spoke about feeling isolated by the responsibilities of running a large operation, about the pressure to maintain traditions while also innovating for survival. Ayanna shared carefully edited versions of her own story. She told him about growing up on the reservation, about her grandmother who had raised her with one foot in ancient traditions and one foot in the modern world. She spoke about her love of healing, her desire to bridge the gap between traditional and contemporary medicine. She did not tell him about the tribal council's decision or the real reason she had left her home. "Do you miss it?" Jack asked. "The reservation, I mean. Your family and community." Ayanna looked out the hospital window at the lights of the town below. "I miss parts of it. I miss my grandmother every day. I miss the sense of belonging somewhere, of being part of something bigger than myself. But, I'm learning that sometimes you have to leave the place you were born to find the place you're meant to be." Jack studied her face in the dim light of the cafeteria, and Ayanna became self-conscious about her birthmark. She had almost forgotten about it during their long conversation, but now she felt the familiar urge to turn away, to hide the part of herself that marked her as different. "You have the most beautiful eyes," Jack said quietly, and Ayanna's heart stopped. "You don't have to." "I'm not saying it to be kind," Jack interrupted. "I'm saying it because it's true. Your eyes are the color of sage honey, and they light up when you talk about healing. I noticed it the first day we met, when you were helping Lucky. You have this way of looking at the world like you can see the good in everything, even when the world hasn't been particularly good to you." Ayanna felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her that way before, with such genuine appreciation for who she was rather than pity for what she looked like. "I should go," she said, suddenly, overwhelmed by emotions she wasn't prepared to handle. "Of course. It's late, and we both need sleep." Jack stood as well, but he hesitated before they reached the cafeteria door. "Ayanna?" She turned back to him. "Would you like to have dinner sometime? I mean, a real dinner, not hospital cafeteria food. There's a steakhouse in Billings that Miguel's been telling me about for years. I thought maybe, when he's feeling better, we could all go together to celebrate his recovery." It was the perfect invitation, casual, including Miguel, so it didn't feel like too much pressure, but still clearly an opportunity for them to spend more time together. Ayanna found herself smiling for the first time in days. "I'd like that," she said. The dinner in Billings became the first of many shared meals. Miguel, once he was recovered enough to enjoy himself, proved to be an enthusiastic matchmaker, regaling them with stories about Jack's teenage years and embarrassing ranch mishaps while simultaneously praising Ayanna's medical skills to anyone who would listen. "This woman," Miguel would say, gesturing dramatically with his fork, "she brought me back from the dead. And she's teaching Jack about traditional remedies for the horses. You should see him now, mixing up poultices like some kind of medicine man." Indeed, Ayanna had begun sharing some of her grandmother's knowledge about natural remedies for treating livestock. When Jack mentioned that one of his mares was suffering from a persistent cough that wasn't responding to conventional treatment, Ayanna suggested a combination of herbs that her grandmother had used for respiratory ailments in both humans and animals. "My grandmother always said that sickness is the same in all living things," Ayanna explained as they prepared the herbal mixture in Jack's barn. "The body wants to heal itself. Sometimes it just needs the right encouragement." The mare recovered completely within a week, and word spread quickly through the ranching community about Ayanna's skill with natural remedies. Soon, other ranchers were quietly asking for her advice about various ailments affecting their livestock. This development was not universally welcomed in Haven Valley.
While some appreciated Ayana's knowledge and gentle manner, others viewed her growing influence with suspicion and resentment. The fact that she was Native American, combined with her distinctive birthmark and her use of traditional remedies, made her a target for those who preferred to keep their community unchanged. Bob Turner, the man who had threatened Lucky that first day, began spreading rumors about Ayana practicing witchcraft on people's animals. He suggested that her remedies might be forms of Native American mysticism that could bring bad luck to the ranches that used them. "Mark my words," he told anyone who would listen at the diner, "no good comes from mixing Indian magic with Christian ranching. That woman's got some kind of spell over Jack Morrison, and it's going to bring trouble to this whole valley." Other voices joined his chorus of disapproval. Mrs. Garrett, the banker's wife, complained that Ayana was taking business away from the local veterinarian by providing alternative treatments. Some of the older ranchers grumbled that traditional remedies were primitive and potentially dangerous compared to modern medicine. The tension came to a head during the annual Harvest Festival, Haven Valley's biggest community event. The festival was held in the town square every October, featuring local food vendors, craft booths, and a dance that served as the social event of the year for the entire community. Jack had asked Ayana to attend as his date, and she had agonized over the decision for days. She wanted to go with him, wanted to be part of the community celebration, but she also understood that appearing publicly as Jack's romantic interest would make her an even bigger target for those who already disapproved of her presence in town. "I don't want to cause trouble for you," she told him when he picked her up that evening. Jack was wearing a clean button-down shirt and his best hat, and he looked more handsome than should be legal. He had brought her a small bouquet of wildflowers picked from his own pasture, and the gesture was so thoughtful and sweet that it made her heart ache. "Ayana," he said, taking her hands in his, "the only trouble I'm worried about is the trouble I'd be in with myself if I let fear keep me from spending time with the most amazing woman I've ever met." The festival started well enough. They sampled food from the various booths, watched the children's costume contest, and Jack introduced Ayana to several of his friends and business associates. Many people were polite, even friendly, and Ayana began to relax and enjoy herself. The problems started when the dancing began. The local band struck up their first song, and Jack offered Ayana his hand with a smile that made her forget about everything except the desire to be close to him. They had been dancing for only 2 songs when Bob Turner, clearly drunk and belligerent, approached the bandstand and demanded the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's happening in our community." The music stopped, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the crowd. Jack instinctively moved closer to Ayana, sensing trouble. "We've got an outsider in our midst," Bob continued, his words slightly slurred but perfectly audible. "An outsider who's been practicing her Indian magic on our livestock, who's been casting spells and spreading her curse around our town." Ayana felt the blood drain from her face. Every person at the festival was now looking at her, and she could see the range of emotions in their eyes: curiosity, suspicion, pity, and, in some cases, outright hostility. "That's enough, Bob," Jack said loudly, stepping forward. "Is it?" Bob challenged. "Jack, this woman has got you so bewitched you can't see straight. Everyone knows that mark on her face is a curse mark. Her own people threw her out because of it. Why are we letting her poison our community?" The crowd murmured uneasily. Some people looked embarrassed by Bob's outburst, but others were nodding in agreement. Ayana realized with sinking horror that Bob's views were more widely shared than she had imagined. "You don't know what you're talking about," Jack said, his voice deadly calm in the way that suggested barely controlled fury. "Don't I? Ask her why she really left the reservation. Ask her what her own people said about that mark she carries." All eyes turned to Ayana, and she felt the weight of their collective judgment like a physical force. She could lie, could make up some story about choosing to leave for better opportunities. But, looking at Jack's face, seeing the trust and care in his eyes, she couldn't bring herself to deceive him. "They said I was cursed," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "The tribal council said my birthmark was a sign of dark spirits, that I brought misfortune wherever I went. They banished me to protect the tribe from whatever evil I might carry." The murmur from the crowd grew louder, and Ayana saw shock and hurt flash across Jack's face. Not because he believed the superstition, but because she hadn't trusted him enough to tell him the truth.
There you have it, Bob declared triumphantly.
Her own people, who understand these things better than we do, threw her out as a curse. And now she's here, bringing that same curse to our community.
That's enough.
The voice that cut through the tension belonged to Dr. Wells, who had pushed her way to the front of the crowd.
Bob Turner, you should be ashamed of yourself. Ayanna Crowfeather is one of the finest people I've ever worked with.
She saved lives, helped heal our animals, and shown nothing but kindness to this community. If you want to talk about curses, maybe you should look at the poison you're spreading with your ignorance and hatred. Miguel Santos, still moving slowly from his injuries but determined to speak, joined Dr. Wells. This woman saved my life, he said, his accented English carrying clear conviction.
Whatever superstitions you want to believe, I know what I experienced.
She fought for me when I was dying, and I am here tonight because of her skill and her compassion.
Other voices began to join in support of Ayanna. Sarah Chen, whose prize bull had recovered from a respiratory infection thanks to Ayanna's herbal treatment, spoke up about her gratitude. Tom Walker, whose daughter Ayanna had helped treat for a severe allergic reaction, defended her medical expertise. But the damage was done.
The festival was effectively over, with groups of people clustering together in heated discussions about what Bob had revealed. Some defended Ayanna, but others expressed concern about harboring someone who had been banished for being cursed.
I need to leave, Ayanna whispered to Jack, her composure finally cracking.
We'll leave together, Jack replied immediately.
No. You stay. This is your community, your life. Don't let my problems destroy your relationships here. Ayanna, don't do this.
Don't let him win by driving you away. But Ayanna was already moving toward the edge of the square, desperate to escape the stares and whispers. Jack caught up with her just as she reached her truck. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, and she could hear the hurt in his voice despite his attempt to remain calm. Because I was afraid, she admitted, tears finally spilling down her cheeks.
I was afraid you would believe it, like everyone else.
I was afraid you would decide I wasn't worth the risk. Jack stepped closer, and, in full view of anyone who might be watching, he gently touched her face, his thumb tracing the edge of her birthmark.
This mark, he said softly, doesn't make you cursed. It makes you unique, and beautiful, and the strongest person I've ever met. Anyone who can't see that is blind.
Jack, your reputation, your business, will survive just fine. The people who matter will judge me by my character, not by who I choose to love. The word hung between them like a bridge neither had quite been ready to cross. Love. It was the first time either of them had said it, and, despite the horrible circumstances, Ayanna felt her heart soar.
I love you too, she whispered.
Jack kissed her then, right there in the town square, with half of Haven Valley probably watching from a distance. It was a declaration as much as a kiss, a public statement that he chose her regardless of what anyone else thought. When they finally broke apart, Ayanna saw that they did indeed have an audience. Some people had expressions of disapproval, but others looked moved by the obvious depth of feeling between them. Dr. Wells was smiling through tears, and Miguel was grinning broadly.
Whatever happens next, Jack said, we face it together.
I'm not letting fear or ignorance or ancient superstitions rob me of the best thing that's ever happened to me. As they drove home together that night, Lucky riding in the back of Jack's truck as he often did, Ayanna felt something shift inside her. For the first time since leaving the reservation, she wasn't running from rejection or hiding from judgment. She was standing her ground, fighting for her right to love and be loved, supported by a man who saw her worth regardless of what others believed. The battle for acceptance in Haven Valley was far from over, but she was no longer fighting it alone. And that made all the difference in the world. The week following the Harvest Festival brought consequences that neither Ayanna nor Jack could have fully anticipated. Word of their public relationship spread beyond Haven Valley, reaching the reservation and stirring up reactions from both communities that threatened to tear apart the fragile life they were trying to build together. On Tuesday morning, Ayanna arrived at the clinic to find a letter waiting for her, postmarked from the reservation. Her hands trembled as she recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope. Inside, Sarah's words were brief and heartbreaking. The council has heard about your involvement with the White Rancher. Elder Spotted Eagle says this proves the dark spirits are using you to create discord between our people and theirs. He says your mark is now spreading its curse across communities.
Please, Ayana, think about what you're doing.
Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The letter fell from Ayana's hands as the full weight of her situation became clear. She wasn't just risking acceptance in Haven Valley, she was potentially closing the door forever on any chance of reconciliation with her own people. The tribal council viewed her relationship with Jack as further evidence of the chaos they believed she carried wherever she went. Dr. Wells found her crying in the supply room 20 minutes later. Bad news from home, the doctor asked gently, noting the letter scattered on the floor. Ayana explained the situation, and Dr. Wells listened with the kind of patient attention that had made her such an effective physician. The funny thing about prejudice, Dr. Wells said when Ayana finished, is that it's always disguised as protection. Your tribal council thinks they're protecting their people from bad luck. Some folks in town think they're protecting their way of life from change. But what they're really protecting is their own fear of anything different. Maybe they're right to be afraid, Ayana said, wiping her eyes. Maybe I do bring trouble. Look what's happening, division in your town, conflict between communities that were just starting to get along better.
Ayana, listen to me carefully.
Dr. Wells sat down beside her and took her hands. I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, and I've learned that some fights are worth having. The fight for love, for acceptance, for the right to be judged by your character instead of your appearance, those are fights that make the world better, even when they're hard. That evening, Ayana shared her mother's letter with Jack as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple. Lucky dozed at their feet, completely content in the way only dogs can be when surrounded by the people they love. Jack read the letter twice before setting it aside and pulling Ayana closer to his side. Are you having second thoughts? He asked quietly.
About us? Never. Ayana's response was immediate and certain.
But I'm scared about what we're putting everyone else through. Your neighbors, my family, the communities that have to live with the consequences of our choice to be together.
You know what Miguel told me today?
Jack said, changing his approach. He said that when he was a young man in Mexico, he fell in love with a girl from a different village, one that had been feuding with his for generations. Everyone said it was impossible, that their families would never accept it.
What happened? They got married anyway. And, you know what?
After a year of being angry, both families realized that the feud was stupid and was keeping them from being happy. Miguel says some of the best friendships in both villages came from that wedding, because it forced people to actually get to know each other instead of just believing old stories. Ayana smiled despite her worries.
And they lived happily ever after?
They had 6 children and 42 grandchildren, and both villages still celebrate their anniversary as the day the feud ended. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching up the ranch's long driveway. Jack tensed as he recognized the trucks, 3 of them, carrying some of the valley's most influential ranchers. The delegation was led by Robert Hutchins, whose family had owned land in the valley for 4 generations and who served as the unofficial leader of the local Ranchers Association. Jack, Hutchins called as he approached the porch, his tone carefully neutral.
We need to talk.
About what, exactly?
Jack replied, not bothering to stand or move away from Ayana.
About the situation that's developing in our community. About some concerns that have been raised. Ayana started to rise, intending to give them privacy to discuss whatever business they had, but Jack's hand on her arm stopped her.
Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Ayana.
Hutchins glanced at the other men, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. Jack, this is delicate. There are economic considerations at stake.
What kind of economic considerations?
Some of our biggest buyers are expressing concerns about doing business with ranches in a valley that's becoming known for controversy. The Peterson family has been buying cattle from 5 different operations here for 20 years, but they've indicated they might look elsewhere if the situation continues to escalate.
Jack's jaw tightened.
The Peterson family's purchases represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual revenue for the valley's ranchers, including a significant portion of Jack's own income.
And what situation would that be, exactly? Jack asked, though they all knew the answer.
Your relationship with the Indian woman, said Bill Crawford, another rancher who had never been known for his diplomacy.
Look, Jack, we don't have anything personal against her, but facts are facts.
She was kicked off the reservation for being cursed, and now there's trouble wherever she goes. First that festival incident, then rumors about bad luck following her traditional medicine. Those aren't facts, Jack interrupted, his voice sharp with anger.
Those are superstitions and prejudices.
The only bad luck Ayanna brings is to ignorant people who can't handle being challenged to think beyond their narrow worldview.
Jack, Hutchins tried again, we understand you have feelings for her, but you need to think about the bigger picture. This valley supports dozens of families.
If we start losing business because of controversy, then we find new buyers who judge us by the quality of our cattle instead of the color of our girlfriend's skin.
The silence that followed was thick with tension.
Ayanna felt her heart breaking as she watched these men, who had known Jack his entire life, turn against him because of their association with her.
There's another issue, said the third rancher, Tom Bradley. The reservation has been making noises about renegotiating the water rights agreement next year.
Word is that the tribal council is saying they can't trust a valley that harbors cursed individuals. If they pull out of that agreement, it could affect irrigation for the whole region.
This was news that hit Jack like a physical blow.
The water rights agreement with the reservation was crucial for the valley's agricultural survival, allowing ranchers access to irrigation from the river that flowed through reservation land.
Without it, many operations would struggle to survive drought years. Ayanna felt physically sick.
Her presence in Jack's life wasn't just causing social friction, it was threatening the economic foundation of the entire community.
We're not asking you to stop seeing her, Hutchins said, sensing Jack's shock about the water rights issue.
But maybe she could move somewhere else, somewhere that wouldn't affect the whole valley's livelihood.
You're asking me to choose between the woman I love and the community that's been my whole life, Jack said quietly. We're asking you to think about what's best for everyone.
After the men left, Jack and Ayanna sat in silence for a long time. The weight of the conversation settled over them like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe.
They're right, Ayanna finally said. No, they're not. Jack, listen to me.
If the reservation pulls out of the water rights agreement because of me, families will lose their livelihoods.
Children will have to leave the only home they've ever known. I can't be responsible for that kind of suffering. And I can't be responsible for letting fear and prejudice win. If I give in to this pressure, what happens the next time someone different tries to make a life here? What happens when the next person needs this community to be brave instead of safe? Ayanna turned to face him fully. What if there was another way? What if I could prove to everyone, both communities, that I'm not cursed, that I don't bring bad luck? How?
Ayanna was quiet for a moment, an idea forming that was both terrifying and potentially perfect. The winter cattle roundup is coming in 3 weeks. Every ranch in the valley participates, and it's always dangerous. People get hurt, cattle get lost, and there's always some kind of crisis that tests everyone's skill and courage.
I know. I've been participating since I was 16. What if I participated too? What if I proved my worth by helping during the most challenging time of the year? And what if I could do it using both traditional knowledge and modern techniques, showing both communities that there's strength in combining our different ways of understanding the world? Jack was intrigued but worried. Ayanna, the winter roundup is brutal. It's dangerous even for experienced cowboys, and some of these men will try to sabotage me or put me in harm's way. I know. But if I can prove myself during the roundup, if I can show that I contribute more than I cost, then maybe both sides will reconsider their positions. The plan that emerged over the following days was ambitious and risky. Ayanna would participate in the winter roundup, working alongside the ranch hands from the Morrison operation. She would bring her medical skills to serve as the unofficial medic for the event, but she would also learn basic cowboy skills and contribute to the actual work of gathering and moving cattle.
Miguel, still recovering but determined to help, began teaching Ayana to rope and ride. Her grandmother had taught her to ride as a child, but ranch work required different skills than the trail riding she had learned on the reservation. The cattle, they can sense fear, Miguel explained as Ayana practiced with a practice rope. But they can also sense confidence and calm. Your grandmother, she taught you about reading animals when you make medicine for them, yes? This is the same thing, just from horseback. Word of Ayana's plan to participate in the roundup spread quickly through both communities, generating intense debate. Some people admired her courage and determination to prove herself. Others saw it as a dangerous stunt that would only lead to more trouble. Elder Spotted Eagle sent another message through Ayana's mother, this one more ominous than the last: if the cursed one participates in the white man's cattle gathering, and if harm comes to anyone because of her presence, the spirits will demand justice. The tribal council will have no choice but to declare her dead to us forever. From the Haven Valley side, the pressure was more subtle but equally intense. Bob Turner organized a group of men to petition the Ranchers Association to ban Ayana from participating, claiming it was a safety issue. Several ranchers expressed concern that her presence would distract the workers and lead to accidents. But support came from unexpected quarters. Dr. Wells volunteered to provide backup medical support for the roundup, calling Ayana's participation exactly the kind of bridge building our communities need. Sarah Chen offered to provide supplies for Ayana's medical kit, and Tom Walker publicly stated that anyone with Ayana's medical training would be an asset during such a dangerous operation. Most importantly, Miguel made it clear that he would be participating despite his recent injuries, and that he would personally vouch for Ayana's abilities. This woman saved my life, he told anyone who questioned her participation. If she says she can help with the roundup, then I trust her. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. The 2 weeks leading up to the roundup were the most intense of Ayana's life. She worked at the clinic during the day, practiced riding and roping in the evenings, and spent her nights studying veterinary techniques for treating cattle in field conditions. Jack worked alongside her, teaching her about cattle behavior and helping her understand the complex logistics of moving hundreds of animals across difficult terrain. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Jack reminded her one evening as she practiced knots for securing injured cattle. Yes, I do, Ayana replied. Not because I believe I'm cursed, but because I believe I'm blessed. My grandmother always said the spirits gave me the gift of healing for a reason. If I can use that gift to help both our communities see past their fears, then everything I've been through will have been worth it. The night before the roundup, Ayana sat by her window looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, her mother was probably praying to the same stars, asking the spirits to protect a daughter she might never see again. In town, families were preparing for a tradition that had defined their community for generations, uncertain whether this year's roundup would end in triumph or tragedy. Ayana thought about her grandmother, about the stories Elena had told her of brave women who had faced impossible choices and found ways to create new possibilities. She thought about Jack, sleeping in his own house across the valley, risking everything he had ever known for the sake of love. She thought about the future she wanted to build, one where children like she had been wouldn't have to choose between their heritage and their happiness. Tomorrow, she would find out whether love and courage were enough to overcome generations of fear and prejudice. Tomorrow, she would discover whether a woman marked as cursed could prove herself blessed instead. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Ayana whispered a prayer to her grandmother's spirit: "Help me be brave enough to show them that our love doesn't divide communities, it heals them." The winter wind carried her words across the valley, where they seemed to settle over the sleeping town like a blessing, preparing everyone for the test that would determine not just Ayana and Jack's future, but the future of understanding between two communities that had lived too long in fear of each other. Dawn broke cold and gray on the morning of the winter roundup, with frost covering the rangeland like a crystalline blanket. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees during the night, creating the kind of harsh conditions that made the annual cattle gathering both necessary and dangerous. Cattle needed to be moved to winter pastures before the heavy snows arrived, and every rancher in the valley knew that delaying the roundup could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe for their herds. Ayana arrived at the Morrison Ranch at 5 in the morning, her breath visible in white puffs as she checked her medical supplies one final time. She had packed everything she might need for treating both humans and cattle: sutures, antibiotics, pain medications, splinting materials, and a selection of traditional herbs that her grandmother had taught her to use for various ailments. Dr. Wells had insisted on providing a satellite phone for emergency communication with the hospital, and Ayanna carried it like a lifeline in her jacket pocket. Jack emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee, and the sight of him in his work clothes, worn leather chaps, thick coat, and the hat that had belonged to his father made Ayanna's heart skip. This was his world, the life he had been born into, and today she would either find her place in it or lose him forever trying. "How are you feeling?" Jack asked, handing her the coffee and studying her face carefully. "Terrified and determined in equal measure," Ayanna admitted. "My grandmother used to say that's the perfect combination for accomplishing something important." Miguel approached them leading 3 horses, his own experienced cutting horse, Jack's favorite mare, and a calm gelding named Sage that he had selected specifically for Ayanna. "Sage is steady and smart," Miguel explained, patting the horse's neck. "He won't panic if cattle move fast, and he knows how to keep his rider safe. Trust him, and he will trust you." The other ranch operations were already gathering at the designated starting point, a wide meadow at the base of the foothills where the cattle had spent the summer months. Ayanna felt dozens of eyes on her as she rode up with Jack and Miguel, and the conversations that had been flowing freely moments before became hushed and awkward. Robert Hutchins, serving as the roundup coordinator, reviewed the plan with the assembled riders. The cattle were scattered across several thousand acres of rough terrain, hidden in draws and valleys that required experienced riders to navigate. The plan was to work in teams, gradually pushing the herd toward the winter pastures while watching for injured or missing animals. "Weather's supposed to turn nasty this afternoon," Hutchins announced, consulting his weather radio. "Snow and wind expected by 4 o'clock. That gives us about 10 hours to get this done, which means we can't afford any delays or problems." His eyes lingered on Ayanna when he said this, and she understood the unspoken message: don't be the problem that costs us precious time. The team spread out across the range, and Ayanna found herself riding with Jack, Miguel, and 2 younger cowboys from neighboring ranches. The work was immediately challenging, requiring her to navigate steep terrain while watching for cattle that were determined to evade capture. Sage proved to be everything Miguel had promised, responding to her guidance while making decisions of his own when he sensed danger. The first crisis came 3 hours into the roundup, when a cow became trapped in a muddy creek bed and began showing signs of exhaustion and hypothermia. The animal was too heavy to pull out manually, and the longer she remained in the cold water, the greater the risk of losing her entirely. "We need ropes and leverage," called Tom Bradley, one of the ranchers who had visited Jack's porch to express concerns about Ayanna's relationship. Ayanna dismounted and waded into the creek to examine the cow, feeling the icy water seep through her boots and jeans. The animal's breathing was labored, and her body temperature was dropping rapidly. "She's going into shock," Ayanna announced. "Even if we get her out, she might not survive without immediate treatment." "Then, we do what we can," Jack replied, organizing the rope system needed to extract the cow. But Ayanna was already moving, pulling supplies from her medical kit. She had dealt with hypothermia before, both in humans and animals, and she knew that the traditional approach of gradual warming was too slow for the current situation. "I need a fire, blankets, and warm water," she called out. "Miguel, can you gather some willow bark from those trees? And I need someone to help me prepare an herbal stimulant that will help stabilize her body temperature." The men looked skeptical, but as they worked to free the cow from the mud, they could see that Ayanna knew what she was doing. She moved with the confidence of someone who had faced similar emergencies before, combining modern medical techniques with traditional remedies in ways that seemed to make instinctive sense. When they finally pulled the cow from the creek, she was barely conscious and showing signs of severe distress. Ayanna immediately began treatment, warming the animal gradually while administering a mixture of herbs dissolved in warm water that she had prepared while the men worked with the ropes. "What is that?" asked one of the younger cowboys, watching as the herbal mixture was administered. "Willow bark for pain and inflammation, combined with ginger and cayenne to stimulate circulation," Ayanna explained while monitoring the cow's breathing. "My grandmother taught me that hypothermia affects the spirit as much as the body. Sometimes you have to address both to save the life." Within 20 minutes, the cow was standing on her own and showing clear signs of recovery. The transformation was so dramatic that even the most skeptical observers had to acknowledge that Ayana's intervention had been crucial to saving the animal. "I've been ranching for 30 years, Bradley said quietly to Jack, "and I've never seen anything like that. Most cows don't come back from that level of hypothermia." But the real test was yet to come. The weather began to deteriorate around noon, with dark clouds gathering over the mountains and the wind picking up significantly. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and the first snow flurries began to swirl across the rangeland. Hutchins made the decision to accelerate the roundup schedule, pushing the teams to work faster despite the increasingly dangerous conditions. It was during this accelerated phase that disaster struck. Billy Crawford, the teenage son of rancher Bill Crawford, was working with a team pushing cattle through a narrow canyon when his horse spooked at a snake and threw him violently to the ground. Billy landed hard on a pile of rocks, and the sickening sound of the impact carried clearly to the other riders. When Jack and Ayana reached him, Billy was unconscious, bleeding from a head wound, and his left leg was twisted at an angle that suggested a severe fracture. Worse yet, the location where he had fallen was nearly a mile from the nearest road, making conventional medical evacuation extremely difficult in the worsening weather. "Oh God," Bill Crawford gasped when he saw his son's condition. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately." But, as they tried to figure out logistics, it became clear that moving Billy in his current condition could be catastrophic. His head injury required stabilization, and the leg fracture needed to be properly secured before transport. The nearest ambulance was 40 minutes away even in good weather, and the storm was making travel increasingly treacherous. Ayana knelt beside Billy, assessing his injuries with the calm professionalism that had saved Miguel's life months earlier. She checked his pupils, monitored his breathing, and carefully examined the leg fracture while the other riders gathered around in worried silence. "The head injury is serious but not immediately life-threatening," she announced after her examination. "But that leg fracture is causing internal bleeding that could become critical if we don't stabilize it properly before moving him." "What do you need?" Jack asked immediately. "Rigid splinting materials, something to elevate his legs, and a way to keep him warm while I work. And I need everyone to stay calm and follow my instructions exactly." What followed was the most intense medical procedure any of them had ever witnessed outside a hospital. Ayana transformed the rocky canyon into a field hospital, using fence posts and blankets to create a splint system that would stabilize Billy's leg while protecting the internal injuries. She used techniques her grandmother had taught her for treating trauma in remote locations, combining them with modern first aid to create a treatment plan that addressed both the immediate danger and the challenges of evacuation. "She needs angle for the leg elevation," Miguel observed, watching Ayana work. "The ground is too uneven." "Can we use the horses?" suggested one of the younger cowboys. Ayana nodded approvingly. "If we position them correctly, they can provide a stable platform while we secure the splint." The image that resulted was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. Billy Crawford lying on an improvised stretcher supported by positioning two gentle horses as living pillars, while a Native American woman with a prominent birthmark performed advanced medical procedures using a combination of modern techniques and traditional wisdom. During the 30 minutes it took for the medical helicopter to arrive, Ayana never left Billy's side. She monitored his vital signs, adjusted his position to optimize blood flow, and administered carefully calculated doses of pain medication to keep him stable during what had to be an agonizing ordeal. But, perhaps most importantly, she talked to Billy continuously, even though he was unconscious for most of the time. She spoke to him in English and in Blackfeet, telling him stories about healing and recovery, describing the beautiful ranch country that would be waiting for him when he woke up, and assuring him that he was surrounded by people who cared about him and were fighting for his life. "My grandmother always said that the spirit can hear even when the mind is sleeping," she explained to Bill Crawford, who was watching his son with tears streaming down his face. "Sometimes talking to the person's spirit is as important as treating their body." When the medical helicopter finally arrived, the EMTs were amazed at the quality of the field treatment Billy had received. The lead paramedic, a veteran with 15 years of experience, took one look at Ayana's splinting work and stabilization techniques and whistled appreciatively. "Whoever did this probably saved his life. the paramedic told Bill Crawford as they prepared Billy for transport. That internal bleeding could have been catastrophic if the fracture hadn't been stabilized properly. Your son was lucky to have someone with this level of skill on the scene. Billy regained consciousness just as he was being loaded into the helicopter, and his first words were a weak but clear thank you directed at Ayanna. The emotional impact of the afternoon's events was overwhelming for everyone involved. As the helicopter disappeared over the mountains, carrying Billy to the trauma center in Billings, the assembled ranchers stood in stunned silence. They had just witnessed something that challenged every assumption they had held about Ayanna Crowfeather and her supposed curse. "That boy is alive because of you," Bill Crawford said to Ayanna, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." But the roundup wasn't over, and the weather was continuing to deteriorate. Despite the emotional exhaustion following Billy's accident, the cattle still needed to be moved to winter pastures before the storm made travel impossible. The final hours of the roundup became a test of endurance and teamwork unlike anything the valley had experienced before. The snow was falling steadily now, the wind was gusting to 30 miles per hour, and visibility was becoming seriously limited. But, somehow, the shared experience of Billy's accident had transformed the dynamic among the riders. Instead of viewing Ayanna as an outsider or potential liability, the ranchers began treating her as an integral part of their team. When cattle became separated in the storm, she was included naturally in the search parties. When horses needed care in the harsh conditions, her knowledge of treating animals was welcomed without reservation. When riders became exhausted or disoriented in the blowing snow, she was there with warm drinks prepared from traditional herbs that helped restore energy and focus. Most remarkably, she began to hear fragments of conversation that suggested a shift in how the ranchers viewed not just her, but the relationship between their community and the reservation. "You know," Tom Bradley said to Robert Hutchins as they worked together to move a stubborn group of cattle, "maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong. If there are people on the reservation with skills like hers, maybe we should be finding ways to work together instead of staying separate." "That Crawford boy would be dead if she wasn't here today," Hutchins replied thoughtfully. "Makes you wonder what other kinds of knowledge we've been missing out on because we're too proud or scared to ask for help." The roundup was completed just as full darkness fell, with all the cattle successfully moved to winter pastures and all the riders accounted for despite the dangerous conditions. But the real accomplishment was something deeper than the successful completion of a challenging task. As the exhausted riders gathered at the Morrison Ranch for the traditional end of roundup meal, there was a sense that something fundamental had shifted in the relationships between people who had known each other for years but had never truly understood each other until now. Bill Crawford approached Ayanna as she was unsaddling Sage, his face serious but no longer hostile. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "I let fear and ignorance guide my judgment about you, and I was wrong. My son is alive tonight because of your skill and your courage, and I will never forget that." Other ranchers followed with similar acknowledgments. Not everyone was ready to completely abandon their prejudices, but the events of the day had created cracks in the foundation of fear that had kept the communities separated. As Jack and Ayanna drove home through the falling snow, both of them exhausted but exhilarated by the day's events, they knew that they had crossed a crucial threshold. The test that was supposed to prove whether Ayanna was cursed or blessed had revealed something more important than either verdict. It had shown that courage and compassion could overcome even the deepest-rooted fears. "How do you feel?" Jack asked as they pulled into his driveway. Ayanna considered the question carefully. She felt exhausted, emotionally drained, and physically sore from the day's hard work. But she also felt something she hadn't experienced since her childhood. She felt like she belonged. "I feel like we're just getting started," she replied, taking his hand in the darkness of the truck cab. Tomorrow, there would be conversations with the tribal council to navigate and relationships with the ranching community to rebuild. There would be Billy Crawford's recovery to monitor and new bridges between communities to construct. But tonight, there was only the satisfaction of knowing that love had proven stronger than fear, that courage had triumphed over prejudice, and that sometimes the most cursed-seeming circumstances could become the greatest blessings if met with an open heart and steady determination. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the valley in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new, full of possibilities that hadn't existed just 24 hours before. The news of what happened during the winter roundup spread far beyond Haven Valley, creating ripples of change that no one could have predicted. Billy Crawford's recovery became a symbol of hope for both communities, but, more importantly, the story of how a supposedly cursed woman had saved a young cowboy's life began to challenge deeply held beliefs about fate, fortune, and the nature of blessing and curse. 3 days after the roundup, Elder Thomas Spotted Eagle arrived at the Morrison Ranch unannounced, driving alone across the reservation boundary for the first time in over a decade. Ayanna saw him walking up the driveway from the kitchen window where she was helping Jack's housekeeper, Mrs. Santos, prepare lunch, and her heart nearly stopped. "He's come to deliver the final judgment," Ayanna whispered, her hands trembling as she set down the plate she had been holding. Jack immediately moved to stand beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "Whatever he says, we face it together." Elder Spotted Eagle looked older than Ayanna remembered, his weather-beaten face etched with new lines of concern and confusion. He accepted Jack's invitation to come inside and sit at the kitchen table, but his eyes never left Ayanna's face as he considered how to begin the conversation that had brought him so far from home. "The spirit spoke to me in a dream," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of authority but also a tremor of uncertainty. "3 nights ago, as the snow fell over our land, I dreamed of my grandmother, who taught me the old stories when I was a boy." Ayanna held her breath, knowing that whatever came next would determine whether she could ever return to her people or would remain forever in exile. "In the dream, my grandmother was angry with me. She said I had forgotten the most important teaching she ever gave me about reading the signs the spirits place on people." Elder Spotted Eagle paused, his gaze moving to the window where the winter landscape stretched toward the reservation. "She reminded me that marks from the spirits can mean many things, and that the shape of a mark is not as important as the actions of the person who carries it." Jack reached for Ayanna's hand under the table, offering what comfort he could as they waited for the elder to continue. "Your grandmother, Elena Crowfeather, came to me in the same dream. She showed me visions of everything that has happened since we sent you away, the healing you have brought to people and animals, the bridges you have built between communities that have been suspicious of each other for generations, and, most importantly, the life you saved during the cattle gathering." Tears began to flow down Ayanna's cheeks as she realized what the elder was leading up to. "Elena told me that the mark on your face is not the sign of the dark wind, as we believed. It is the mark of the healing wind, the sacred breath that carries medicine between worlds. She said you were born to be a bridge between our people and others, to show that healing comes in many forms and that love is the strongest medicine of all." Elder Spotted Eagle reached into his jacket and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft deer hide. "The tribal council has voted to overturn your banishment. You are welcome to return home whenever you choose. But Elena also told me that home is not always the place where you are born. Sometimes it is the place where you choose to plant your roots and grow your medicine." He opened the bundle to reveal a necklace made of turquoise and silver, with a pendant shaped like a bird in flight. "This belonged to your grandmother. She asked me to give it to you and to tell you that she is proud of the woman you have become and the healer you were always meant to be." Ayanna accepted the necklace with shaking hands, remembering how her grandmother had worn it during ceremonies and special occasions throughout her childhood. The weight of it around her neck felt like a blessing and a homecoming all at once. "There is one more thing," Elder Spotted Eagle said, turning to address Jack directly. "The tribal council would like to invite you to meet with them, Mr. Morrison. There are discussions to be had about the water rights agreement and other matters of mutual concern. But, more than business, we would like to learn from the man who saw the truth about Ayanna when we could not." The meeting with the tribal council took place 2 weeks later, in the community center where Ayanna had been banished just 6 months earlier. But, this time, she walked through the doors hand in hand with Jack, her head held high and her grandmother's necklace catching the light as it rested over her heart. The conversation that followed was unlike anything the reservation had experienced in decades. Instead of the usual formal negotiations between separate entities, this became a genuine dialogue about shared challenges, mutual respect, and collaborative solutions to problems that affected both communities. Jack spoke about the sustainable farming practices he was implementing on his ranch, techniques that could help preserve the land for future generations. The tribal council shared traditional ecological knowledge that could complement modern conservation efforts. Dr. Wells, who had been invited to participate, discussed the possibility of establishing a joint medical training program that would combine traditional healing practices with contemporary medicine. Most remarkably, Elder Spotted Eagle proposed the creation of an annual healing gathering that would bring together traditional medicine practitioners from the reservation with medical professionals from surrounding communities. The goal would be to share knowledge, build relationships, and develop new approaches to healthcare that honored both ancient wisdom and modern innovation. Ayana has shown us that healing happens when different ways of knowing come together, the elder explained. Perhaps it is time for our communities to learn from her example. The formal reconciliation was beautiful, but, for Ayana, the most meaningful moment came when her mother, Sarah, stood up from the back of the room where she had been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings. "My daughter," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology for doubting the gift the spirits gave you. I let fear make me forget what my own mother taught me about the power of love to transform curses into blessings." The embrace between mother and daughter lasted several minutes and left hardly a dry eye in the room. It was a healing that went beyond individual reconciliation to touch something deep in the collective soul of the community. But the changes weren't limited to the reservation. Back in Haven Valley, the events of the Winter Roundup had sparked conversations about inclusion, prejudice, and the assumptions that people make about others based on appearance or origin. Billy Crawford's recovery had been remarkable, and, as soon as